This is Booked for Drama, where stories burn, hearts break, the tea is always hot and never a part two. Today we're diving into after they forced me out of school, the campus tyrant fell into a 10-year depression. Let's go. The first day of college, I fell for the campus tyrant at first sight, but I never dared to get close. After all, he was the son of the university's biggest donor, and I was just a scholarship kid who would starve without financial aid. I thought it would be a quiet, 4-year crush, a secret I'd carry alone. Then, the most popular girl in our class, Melinda, accused me of stealing her lipstick. The campus tyrant, Robert, looked at me with disgust. So, your parents are poor. Does that mean they never taught you not to steal? He wasn't wrong. My parents had died when I was very young and no one had ever taught me right from wrong. That accusation ruined everything. I ended up leaving school. Years later, a rumor reached me. Robert, during his senior year, had to take a leave of absence for depression, a deep depression that lasted a decade. The incident had started in gym class. I was the only one left behind in the room when Melinda's lipstick tube was found twisted down into a strange, curved shape. Never used lipstick before? What kind of mouth do you have to ruin it like this? Someone sneered. Melinda tossed it aside in disgust. Gross. Robert stood beside her, his frown sharp and filled with obvious disdain. Check the rest of her stuff, someone suggested. If she'd take lipstick, who knows what else? Yeah, she probably needs a full face of makeup to match that lipstick. Laughter erupted around me, but Robert stopped Melinda before she could reach my bag. Don't bother, just look inside. She probably has other people's things too. Before I could protest, my backpack was dumped onto the floor. Old textbooks and crumpled bills spilled out and my cheeks burned with shame. Then an expensive leather shoe pressed down on a small, red notebook. What's this? Don't touch that, I shouted, but Melinda only gripped it tighter. She began reading aloud, her tone dripping with mock sweetness. Dear Robert, today is the 18th day of my secret crush on you. I saw you were sick, so I left some medicine in your textbook. Dear Robert, it's your birthday and 6 months into my crush. I couldn't buy those sneakers, but I got you socks. Hope you like them. Page after page, she read, mocking every heartfelt entry. My face burned hotter with each word. Robert's expression darkened, storm clouds forming over his features. Dar Robert, someone mimicked. Rupert, another laughed. The class laughed, pointing at his feet. Are those the socks she gave you, with initials? Oh my god. Robert's irritation boiled over. He kicked off his shoes, ripped the socks off, and shoved them into my bag. Don't ever give me this kind of thing again, he spat. Tears stung my eyes. He slipped his shoes back on, stormed out, then returned a few steps later. In front of everyone, he tore pages from my notebook about him and flung them in my face. And don't ever like me again, he hissed. I wanted to vanish. When I tried to leave, Melinda tripped me, her friends holding me down as she smeared lipstick across my cheeks. Her words were left in red. I am a thief. The room cheered. Phones flashed. Don't think this is over, she hissed. That lipstick cost $80. I want a new one in 3 days. $80, my entire allowance for half a year. I trembled. It wasn't me. Her patience snapped. Then why weren't you in gym class? Yeah, who else? Tell us. My heart is pounding because my shoes are broken. The classroom froze. My canvas shoes were falling apart. Then laughter erupted. The bell rang, ending the ordeal. Robert returned to his seat, bumping my shoulder, a small, rare touch. He wasn't cruel. At least I hadn't thought so at first. Earlier, he had comforted me after classmates mocked my poverty online. It's not your fault, he said, lightly patting my head before walking away. But everything changed when I offended Melinda. The class turned against me. Robert's messages stopped, first checking in, then vanishing. Rumors spread that he was trying to impress Melinda. Finally, it all clicked. Love me, love my dog. Hate me, hate my dog. I thought if I could just explain myself, they'd leave me alone. But the next day, the threat started. They demanded money, threatening to tell the administration, using Robert's powerful name to intimidate me. I had no choice. I asked my professors for time off and hunted for part-time work. Manual labor barely paid $20 a day. Desperate, I turned to friends from the orphanage who helped me land a waitress job at a karaoke bar. I never expected to see them there. The moment I walked into their private room, the rowdy group fell silent. Robert, glass of whiskey in hand, froze, disgust sharp in his gaze. Well, look who's here. Melinda's voice dripped with mockery. Our little Ivy, thief by day and hostess by night. I set down the drinks, cheeks burning, and tried to slip away. Stop. Something hit the back of my head, a remote control. Did the customer give you permission to leave? She taunted. I forced a smile. Can I get you anything else, ma'am? Melinda smirked. You're here to make money, right? Lucky for you, I'm generous today. 1 bottle of liquor, $1,000. Deal? $1,000. It was more than I'd ever handled, more than my budget for 4 years of college. The temptation was real, but I never touched alcohol in my life. What's the matter? Don't want it? I'll do it, I said, looking her directly in the eye. Robert snorted in disdain. The others erupted in excitement. Come on, our little escort for the night. Take a seat. I sat down, knowing they were mocking me, but I'd grown used to that. Elementary school, middle school, college, it never ended. Robert shifted slightly away, as if I were something filthy. I opened the first bottle. The smell hit me instantly, making me cough. That night, I had my first drink, and discovered I was allergic to alcohol. Half a bottle in, red welts erupted across my skin. The room spun. Someone shoved me into another person's arms. Robert, I feel sick. Can you get me water? I mumbled, whoa, someone cheered. This is spicy. She's calling Robert's name while in another guy's arms. Robert's brow furrowed, irritation flickering across his face as he noticed my hand clutching someone else. He looked away, pathetic. And so, I became their plaything for the night. Melinda pushed me from one man to another, their hands roaming freely, except Robert. The moment someone tried to involve him, he stood abruptly. You guys do your thing. Leave me out. He threw down his glass and left. Confused murmurs followed. What's with him? Oh, right. He hates her. Mood ruined, I guess. Melinda said nothing. She watched Robert go, then smiled at the group. Since he's gone, I guess it's time to call it a night. They left, jackets in hand, leaving me with several large, intimidating strangers. My head throbbed. I fumbled for my phone, typing frantically. Are you far? I'm still in the private room. Please help me. Strangers came in. No reply. Panic surged. As I tried to dial 911, my phone was knocked away. A sharp slap landed on my cheek. You dare call the cops, you bitch. That night became unforgettable. 3 men pinning me down. Pain, fear, and then darkness. When I woke, I was covered in sticky residue. Blood between my legs. A new message appeared on my phone from Robert. Get lost. I skipped school for a week. Someone had uploaded a video of that night to the campus forum. The men's faces blurred. Mine wasn't. Everyone recognized me. I was terrified. I even considered ending it all on the bridge. I crossed to get to school. Regret clawed at me. Why had I hoped Robert would help? I spent another night in my cockroach-infested apartment, taking 3 showers to wash the memory away. Then my academic advisor called. If you miss one more class, you'll be expelled. Ivy, I know you're not that kind of girl. Come back. You've worked so hard to get here. She was right. I had worked for years, collecting bottles and cans, studying by moonlight, sacrificing every moment to save for tuition. Maybe some people at school would support me. So I returned. But I was wrong. As I entered the classroom, whispers erupted. Someone crowed like a rooster. Look who's back. Our little celebrity. Lost your virginity at 18. First in class. Laughter exploded. My fists clenched so tightly my palms bled. Enough. Robert slammed his hand on the desk, the room silent. Panting, chest heaving, he left the class, skipping a session for the first time ever. Why him? Doesn't he hate Ivy? Since that karaoke night, he's been quieter. Melinda pulled a thick wad of cash from her purse. Oh, right. You drank 3 bottles that night. Here's 4,000, extra for your hard work. I stared at the red bills, alone in the empty classroom. Finally, I tucked them into my bag, covered my face with my hands, and wept into my worn backpack. I wanted that money, but now all I could think about was my parents, long gone, and the life I'd nearly lost. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Ivy, the dean wants to see you. My academic advisor's voice was gentle, but her eyes told me what her words did not. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a trial. When I entered the conference room, the air was heavy with judgment. The dean sat at the center of the long mahogany table, flanked by 2 professors who avoided my gaze. Melinda sat with her arms folded, lips curved in a faint smile, and next to her, Robert. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes never once looked at me. Ivy, the dean began, clearing his throat, you are aware of the allegations against you. Yes, I whispered, but I didn't. Melinda's voice cut through mine like a knife. She stole from me. Everyone in the class saw the lipstick. And don't forget the diary. She admitted everything herself, writing pages about Robert. Isn't it obvious what kind of girl she is? Laughter echoed in my memory, mocking voices reading my words aloud, tearing pieces of my heart for entertainment. I forced myself to stay still, nails digging crescents into my palms. Ivy, my advisor, interjected, her tone firm. None of this proves theft. At most, it proves she has feelings. Is that a crime? The dean adjusted his glasses, impatient. The university cannot ignore the disruption this incident has caused. Your classmates feel unsafe. The reputation of this institution is at stake, especially considering the Nordling family's contributions. His gaze flickered, almost apologetically, toward Robert. So that was it. Money spoke louder than truth. I looked at Robert then, silently begging him to say something, anything, to defend me like he once did when he told me, it's not your fault. But his jaw tightened and he stared at the polished floor as if it held all the answers he couldn't give. The verdict came quickly. You are hereby expelled from this university, effective immediately. The words hit harder than any slap, expelled. Everything I had worked for, 6 years of saving bottles and cans, 2,000 nights of studying by other people's windows, all wiped away in an instant. My advisor gasped, Dean, this is unfair. It is final, he said, rising from his chair. The conversation was over. I gathered my tattered backpack, the seams frayed and patched too many times to count. It felt heavier than ever, filled not with books, but with the crushing weight of shame. As I turned to leave, Melinda's perfume drifted close. She leaned in, her whisper venomous, told you, this is just the beginning. I froze but I didn't look at her. Instead, my eyes found Robert's one last time. I wanted him to see me, to at least acknowledge what they had done. But he didn't. He kept staring at the floor. I walked out of the university with nothing but my broken bag on my shoulder and the cruel memory of pages torn from my diary scattered across a classroom floor. For the first time since my parents died, I truly had no home. The city swallowed me whole. I moved into a single room in a crumbling building. The kind where cockroaches scurried across the floorboards and the pipes groaned all night like dying animals. The rent was cheap, but so was my dignity. I worked anywhere that would take me. Factories where my hands blistered from scrubbing rust off metal parts. Greasy diners where customers snapped their fingers at me like I was less than human. Clubs where the air stank of liquor and sweat, and men's eyes clung to me like flies on spoiled meat. At the end of every day, my body was so heavy I thought I'd collapse before I made it up the narrow stairs to my room. Sometimes I didn't even bother with dinner. I'd curl up on the thin mattress, stomach empty, ears full of the city's restless noise, and wonder if this was all my life would ever be. The girl who once dreamed of becoming a scholar, of lifting herself out of poverty with knowledge, was gone. In her place stood a shadow, nameless and invisible. But I refused to let that be the end. Every night, after 12-hour shifts, I opened books I borrowed from second-hand shops or picked from dumpsters behind the university I could no longer enter. I studied business, law, finance, fields I'd never dared to touch before. My candlelight was weak, but my resolve burned brighter than any flame. When exhaustion threatened to drown me, I'd whisper to myself, never again would I beg for someone else's help. Never again would I trust the kindness of people like Robert. Never again would I let anyone destroy me without consequence. Years passed in a blur of sweat and tears. The city changed, but I remained in its shadows, sharpening myself in secret. By the time I turned 28, I was no longer the scholarship girl clutching a torn notebook. I was something else entirely, a woman carved from survival, ambition, and unbroken will. And though the world had forgotten me, I had never forgotten them. I couldn't sleep. It wasn't just the hangover or the stack of unpaid assignments or the whispers of students outside my dorm room. It was her, Ivy. Her face haunted me, the way her hands trembled when she begged for water at the karaoke bar. The image of her diary, those tattered pages full of her tiny, careful confessions burned in my memory. Socks she bought with $17. The medicine she slipped into my textbook. Birthday wishes written in pencil because she couldn't afford more. And I laughed at her. I had torn her words, shredded the only proof of her existence into pieces, and walked away. It was supposed to feel satisfying. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, cornered, humiliated, and pleading. The disgust I'd once felt for her poverty turned inward, into myself. I stopped eating properly. I couldn't focus in class. My grades collapsed like a house of cards. Professors who had once admired my sharp mind avoided me. Friends distanced themselves, whispering about how the great Robert Nordling had gone soft, broken by some scholarship girl. I began skipping lectures. At first it was one here and there. Then whole weeks. Rumors spread quickly. Robert's lost it, people said. He's not even going to graduate. And I didn't argue. I had fallen into a black hole of self-loathing. My family noticed. My father's sighs grew longer, his gaze colder. My mother stopped asking questions. Even Melinda, the one I had fought for, seemed to sense my collapse. She never reached out, but she didn't need to. By my final year, I couldn't face campus anymore. I didn't care about scholarships, honors, or appearances. I left, quietly, my absence a whisper among the chaos I had left behind. The mighty campus tyrant was gone. Whispers followed me anyway, stories of a boy who had been unstoppable, now hollowed and broken. And somewhere deep down I knew why. It wasn't Melinda's games. It wasn't the pressure of family or status. It was Ivy. And for the first time in 10 years, I realized the girl I had humiliated, abandoned, and ignored, the one I thought was nothing, was the one who had destroyed me. The years moved slowly, but they did not spare anyone. Melinda flourished. She married into wealth. Her social media feeds glowing with vacations, designer handbags, and smiling photographs with her equally perfect husband. She walked through life as if she owned the world, her laughter light and cruel, a reminder of how easy power came to those born into it. Robert, on the other hand, sank. He wandered through his 20s as a ghost of the campus tyrant he once was. The sharp, commanding presence that had terrified classmates and professors alike was gone. His father's disappointment weighed on him like chains, and even Melinda's faint smiles felt like knives when he remembered the girl he had destroyed. Nights were long haunted by memories of Ivy's diary entries, her trembling hands, her quiet generosity. He could never undo what he had done. Ivy? She was invisible to them, but every hardship, every humiliation, every job that left her aching, starving, or trembling became a brick in the foundation of her empire. She learned quickly. Where the law allowed, she exploited it. Where the system failed, she invented ways to thrive. Factories turned into small businesses. Small businesses into partnerships, partnerships into ventures that attracted attention from investors who valued ambition above everything else. By 28, Ivy had become a woman no one could ignore. Sleek, commanding, and impeccably composed, she carried herself with the air of someone who had survived a war no one else could imagine. Every piece of power she acquired was deliberate, measured, and intended for one purpose, to reclaim what had been stolen from her and more. She never forgot the nights she had cried herself to sleep, the times she had stood trembling as men leered, or the classroom where her innocence had been destroyed. Every scar, every sleepless night, every bitter drop of rage had been meticulously stored, and it now fueled her with an unrelenting drive. Ivy had not only survived, she had become untouchable. And soon, the world would learn that the girl they had destroyed was no longer the same girl who had cowered in a crumbling dorm room hiding her tattered notebook and broken dreams. She would rise, she would strike, and she would ensure that those who had laughed at her, Melinda and Robert, would pay in ways they could never imagine. The city lights glittered like shards of glass, reflecting Ivy's own sharp edges as she stepped from the black limousine. She was no longer the girl who had stumbled through campus halls, notebook torn, pride shattered. She was deliberate in every step, heels clicking, dress tailored to perfection, hair and makeup immaculate. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had clawed her way out of darkness and emerged untouchable. The gala was in full swing, hosted by Melinda's husband's corporation, a glittering show of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings, the rich laughed, the champagne flowed, and everyone assumed they were untouchable. Melinda, most of all. And then she saw Robert, standing awkwardly at the edge of the crowd, a shadow of the campus tyrant he once was. His suit hung loosely, eyes hollow and haunted. The sharp arrogance had drained from him, replaced by a wary tension as if he sensed a storm approaching but didn't know from which direction. And Melinda, smiling, laughing, flaunting her status, but her eyes caught the movement of Ivy across the room. Her smile faltered. Ivy allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The power in that smile was silent but deadly. She didn't rush forward. She didn't announce herself. Instead, she moved with control, weaving through the crowd, exchanging polite greetings, shaking hands, all the while calculating. When she finally approached the center of the room, where Melinda lingered in the spotlight, their eyes met. Melinda's world seemed to pause for a fraction of a second, a recognition, a flash of fear. Ivy, Melinda said, her voice forced into sweetness masking the tremor underneath. Hello, Melinda, Ivy replied smoothly, her tone perfectly calm and flinching. It's been 10 years. Melinda's hand hovered over her drink, unsure whether to shake it or step back. The others at the table noticed the tension, whispers beginning to ripple through the room. And then Robert noticed. His breath hitched and he looked as if he might faint. The man who had once commanded the campus with a glare, the same man who had torn her diary and spat in her face, now seemed powerless to move, trapped in the magnetic pull of her presence. I let the moment stretch, letting every glance, every faltering step of theirs, reinforce the truth. She had returned, but she was no longer a victim. Tonight, she held all the cards. And this was only the beginning. Ivy had waited. Every step she took for the past 10 years, every sleepless night, every deal struck in shadows, had been for this moment. Melinda had thought she had won. She had married into wealth, flaunted her status, and laughed at everyone beneath her. But Ivy had been watching, studying, learning, calculating. The first whispers began subtly. A well-placed journalist received an anonymous tip about Melinda's extravagant lifestyle and questionable charity donations. A discreet social media leak hinted at a liaison she had tried to hide, a name that sent ripples through the high society circles she relied upon. At first, Melinda laughed them off. Just rumors, she said at a brunch with her elite friends, brushing her perfectly manicured nails over the glossy table. But the glances around her were different now. Curious, uncertain, calculating. Ivy made her next move with surgical precision. Financial audits revealed discrepancies in Melinda's accounts, evidence that pointed directly to her reckless mismanagement and underhanded deals. Contracts she had signed to maintain appearances suddenly became public, exposing her hypocrisy and greed. The final blow came at a high society gala, the same kind of glittering event where she had once flaunted her power. Ivy arrived, elegant as ever, her presence commanding attention without a word. She approached the main stage just as Melinda was about to deliver a speech about philanthropy. Ladies and gentlemen, Ivy's voice rang out calm and clear, carrying across the room. It seems there are a few details about our hostess that have been conveniently overlooked. A subtle wave of papers fluttered down from the stage above. Emails, contracts, photographs, meticulously compiled evidence of Melinda's infidelity, financial deception, and cruelty toward those who trusted her. Gasps filled the room. Cameras flashed. Friends recoiled. Melinda's face went pale, her perfect mask cracking under the weight of exposure. She tried to speak, to laugh it off, but the whispers had become a roar. Every connection she had relied upon began to falter. Sponsors pulled back, socialites avoided her, and even her husband's hand gripped tighter around his drink, unsure how to respond. Ivy watched, emotionless. No gloating, no triumph in her voice, just cold, precise satisfaction. Every moment of suffering, every hardship, every humiliation she had endured as a student had been remembered, stored, and now repaid. By the end of the night, Melinda was a woman exposed, crumbling under the weight of the life she had so arrogantly built. And Ivy, standing tall amid the chaos, knew this was only the first strike. Robert had not expected to see her. When the invitation arrived, he thought it was a routine business meeting, an opportunity to regain some semblance of relevance, to remind the city that Robert Nordling still mattered. He had no idea the world had already shifted beneath his feet. The conference room was pristine, a glass and steel statement of power and influence. Robert walked in, hesitant, but attempting a veneer of confidence. And then he saw her, Ivy, seated at the head of the table, immaculate in a tailored suit that exuded authority, her calm gaze sweeping over the room with perfect control. The Ivy he had tormented in college, the poor, trembling scholarship girl, was gone. In her place sat a woman whose presence demanded obedience, whose mere look could unseat the most confident men in the room. Robert, she said, voice soft but edged with steel, I'm glad you could join us. He swallowed, throat tight. I thought I was leading this discussion. She raised an eyebrow, the faintest smile playing at her lips. You thought, let me clarify, the meeting today is under my direction. I'll handle the agenda, you may observe. Whispers circulated around the table as Ivy began speaking, outlining deals, investments, and strategies with the precision and depth that made Robert's attempts to interject clumsy and irrelevant. Every time he tried to assert himself, she countered calmly, exposing gaps in his knowledge, errors in his assumptions, and, subtly but unmistakably, his complete lack of influence. He opened his mouth to argue again and froze. She had anticipated it, her expression unflinching. I expected you to know the Johnson merger would be finalized this month, she said smoothly, yet here you are unaware. Perhaps you've lost track over the past decade. Laughter, or something close to it, rippled quietly around the table. Robert felt heat rise in his chest, not with anger, but shame. The room that once seemed full of potential allies now felt like a cage. Every glance, every nod from Ivy's colleagues reminded him he was powerless. The powerless scholarship girl, the one he had humiliated, ignored, and destroyed, was now the architect of his ruin. By the end of the meeting, Robert sat silently, hands trembling slightly, realizing that the city's whispers were true. He had fallen behind and she had risen far beyond him. The man who had once controlled Ivy's life now owed her more than he could repay. Not favors, but the simple, terrifying acknowledgement that she could destroy him with a single move. Ivy stood, smooth and unyielding as the meeting concluded. Thank you for attending, Robert. I hope you found the discussion enlightening. He wanted to say something, anything to assert the old hierarchy, but no words came. He could only nod, his throat dry, the crushing reality settling in. The girl he had tormented, the girl he had dismissed, was now the one holding all the power. The past had a way of lingering, like a shadow that refuses to fade. Ivy had kept it carefully stored, the old video from that night at the karaoke bar. The night she had been cornered, humiliated, and assaulted, while Robert and Melinda looked on, or worse, had failed to act. For years, it had been a secret, a wound she carried alone. But now she controlled it. Through trusted media allies, Ivy released the footage, not in its raw, shameful form, but carefully edited to frame the truth. She was the victim, the girl who had been silenced, bullied, and abandoned. Melinda's arrogance and cruelty were undeniable. Robert's indifference and disgust could not be hidden. Every frame told the story Ivy wanted the world to see. The video spread like wildfire. Headlines screamed the scandal. Social media exploded with commentary and public opinion shifted in a heartbeat. Where once Melinda had been untouchable, now she was the villain. Sponsors cut ties with her husband's family, fearing association with someone exposed as cruel and deceitful. Invitations to high society events stopped coming. Friends and allies began to distance themselves, whispering behind her back. Robert fared no better. The once mighty campus tyrant became a cautionary tale overnight. Analysts dissected his behavior, journalists highlighted his past arrogance, and social media called him out as a symbol of cruelty and failure. He tried to defend himself, but Ivy had anticipated every argument, every spin, every excuse. Her narrative was airtight. Ivy watched from her office, calm and composed, a faint smile on her lips. This was justice, not chaos. She had waited, planned, and now, with one calculated move, she had shifted the balance completely. For the first time in 10 years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time, satisfaction. But Ivy knew this was only the beginning. Humiliation alone was not enough. She had dismantled reputations, yes, but real power required control, influence and leverage. Robert and Melinda were exposed, but their fall could be exploited further. And Ivy? She had all the pieces in place. The world Melinda had built so carefully, brick by brick crumbled beneath her faster than she could react. Her husband, finally seeing the weight of public shame and the cracks in her character, filed for divorce without hesitation. Lawyers moved quickly, severing her from the wealth and status she had so arrogantly flaunted. Her family, once proud of her achievements, recoiled. Calls went unanswered, messages ignored, and invitations rescinded. The social circles that had once fawned over her now vanished like mist in the morning sun. Friends she had counted on for loyalty turned their backs, unwilling to be associated with a woman whose name had become synonymous with scandal and cruelty. Even her bank accounts were frozen, assets locked in legal limbo, a silent, invisible hand manipulating every line of her life. Ivy's influence was everywhere, unseen but undeniable, and Melinda was trapped in its web. She fell to her knees in Ivy's office, desperate and broken, tears carving clean paths down her pale cheeks. Please, please, Ivy. I'm begging you. Have mercy, she whispered, her voice cracking with humiliation and fear. Ivy looked down at her unflinching. The years of pain, humiliation, and struggle replayed in her mind like a perfect film. The lipstick, the notebook, the mockery, the night at the karaoke bar. Every ounce of suffering Melinda had inflicted on her had been meticulously remembered. And now the roles were reversed. Don't think this is over, Ivy said, her voice calm, icy, and deliberate. She repeated the words Melinda had once spat at her, the ones that had broken her so completely in the past. The effect was devastating. Melinda's knees buckled, and the room seemed to shrink around her. Ivy turned away, leaving Melinda kneeling in ruin, powerless, isolated, and exposed. The world no longer bowed to her name. Every gleaming image of perfection she had cultivated was shattered. For Ivy, it was not just revenge, it was closure. And she savored the quiet, perfect symmetry of justice finally served. The room buzzed with anticipation. A glittering crowd of elites, investors, and socialites gathered under the grand chandeliers. Ivy moved through them with quiet authority, every step deliberate, every gaze measured. She wasn't just attending this event. She was orchestrating the final act of a decade-long reckoning. Robert saw her from across the room and froze. The man who had once commanded fear and respect now looked smaller. A shadow of the tyrant he had been. Yet he had no idea how tightly he was ensnared. Ivy approached him slowly, her heels clicking like the ticking of a metronome. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing the tension radiating from her. She stopped directly in front of Robert, eyes calm but lethal. Robert, she said, her voice carrying easily through the hum of conversation. Do you remember me? He swallowed hard. Words failed him. She held out a small leather-bound notebook, her diary the one he had once torn and mocked. The room went silent as everyone realized what she held. Read it, Ivy commanded. Read the entries where you were the one I cared for. Read them aloud and then explain to everyone what you did that night. Explain what you allowed to happen. Robert's hands shook. He tried to step back, but the subtle pressure of Ivy's gaze pinned him in place. Around them, whispers began, people sensing the storm about to break. He opened the diary, voice cracking as he read the first entry. Dear Robert, I saw you had a stomachache, so I tucked some medicine into your textbook. I hope you feel better. Each entry he read was a reminder of his own cruelty, the socks, the birthday wishes, the small acts of care he had dismissed and destroyed. Ivy's presence was a knife against his conscience, silent yet merciless. Finally, she forced the confession. Tell them, Robert, tell them what you did that night. Tell them how you watched and did nothing. The words choked him. I didn't help. His voice broke, trembling as sobs overtook him. He collapsed onto a chair. The proud, untouchable campus tyrant reduced to a trembling, shamed man. The crowd stared, stunned. Whispers turned into murmurs, murmurs into quiet horror. The man who had tormented Ivy, who had been celebrated for years as the unbreakable tyrant of the campus, now sat in ruins before them all. Ivy stepped back, expression serene, almost detached. Justice had been served. His reputation lay in pieces, his dignity gone. And she had watched every moment unfold with the precision of a master strategist. For the first time in a decade, Ivy felt nothing but clarity. The girl who had been powerless was gone. In her place stood a woman who had taken everything and left her enemies with nothing. Ivy stood at the edge of her office balcony, the city sprawling beneath her like a chessboard she had mastered. The lights shimmered, but nothing glittered brighter than the calm certainty that now filled her. Robert had been broken, his pride, his reputation, and his dignity all shattered. Melinda had been exposed, humiliated, and abandoned by everyone she had once relied upon. Both of them had fallen, caught in the precise web Ivy had spun over 10 years. But Ivy? She had risen. Every hardship, every act of cruelty, every betrayal she had endured had fueled her transformation. And now, the girl who had been powerless was gone, replaced by a woman who held influence, wealth, and respect in every corner of her life. She could have extended mercy. She could have offered reconciliation, even a cold forgiveness that would make her appear magnanimous. But Ivy didn't need to. Their downfall was proof enough. Pity was a luxury she had never had. Now it was unnecessary. Ivy turned from the balcony, her reflection in the glass as sharp and untouchable as the steel in her gaze. She had no regrets, no lingering doubts. Her enemies were ruined, their lives a cautionary tale, while hers gleamed with opportunity, freedom, and power. In the quiet of her office, she finally allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. 10 years of suffering, planning, and rising had led to this moment. She had taken back everything that had been stolen from her and more. The past no longer haunted her. It had served its purpose, forged her into someone unstoppable. And the future, her future, was hers alone. Ivy had delivered the final blow. The cemetery was quiet, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. Ivy knelt at her parents' graves, her hands resting lightly on the cold stone. She laid fresh flowers down, their petals vivid against the gray marble, a small gesture of love and remembrance. I've done it, she whispered softly, her voice carrying both triumph and tenderness. I've avenged myself. I've lived well, stronger than anyone ever imagined. For a moment, the memories of her past, the humiliation, the fear, the nights spent crying alone, flickered behind her eyes. But she no longer allowed them to sting. Those years of suffering had forged her into the woman who now stood tall, untouchable, and free. I will live without guilt, she continued, without fear and without pity. She rose, brushing dirt from her hands, and turned toward the path that led away from the graves. Each step was deliberate, filled with purpose. Behind her, the world, once bright with the illusions of her enemy's power, was reduced to ash. Melinda's empire had fallen. Robert's arrogance had been crushed. Every person who had attempted to destroy her had been reminded that cruelty carried consequences. Yet Ivy did not look back. She did not gloat. The fire she had ignited was a warning, a statement of justice delivered with precision, not chaos. She walked forward as the queen of her own destiny, a woman who had reclaimed everything she had lost and more. And as she disappeared into the horizon, the world behind her, ruined, humbled, and trembling, bore silent witness to her reign. Ivy had risen from the ashes, and she would never fall again. The end. And that's a wrap on today's reading here at Booked for Drama. If you felt anything, rage, swoon, secondhand heartbreak, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with your fellow drama lovers. If you have any requests, drop them in the comments. Until next time, keep reading, and keep the drama on the page.